Good evening. I'm back in Acts chapter 1 this evening. As I was going back through this entire study and thinking long range, and my goal, for the most part, is to deal with this only on Sunday mornings and just grab pieces here and there and to highlight things, hopefully from a little different angle than maybe you had noticed it before, but very much digging in and looking at what it says to challenge us. This morning we talked about those first two chapters and the fact that that's our heritage. Those things that those apostles and that early church did is really our heritage. I'm proud of my heritage. I'm proud of the fact that they dealt with hardships and just plowed right on through and in the footsteps of Jesus in such a strong way. But as I was going through and looking at this, I stopped at one word and I thought, there's a sermon in itself for me. So I'll share it with you tonight. It starts with the idea of how hard it is to wait. Now, I was talking with people before services and talking with Melanie on the way here. And she asked me tonight on the way here, as we were discussing things, I mentioned we all had issues. And then as only wives can do sometimes, she looked at me and she said, what are your issues? And I think of how much I enjoy being here and how much I enjoy life. And I'm a very positive person. If you've been around me, you pretty much know that. And I sat there and thought for a minute and I said, I stress over time. I want to be everywhere right now. If I've got any time left, that's the prime, it's now. It's not 10 years down the road. I'll be slowing down. And for some of you may think you already have, and others have wondered, will you ever? But anyway, I know I will. It's just a process of time. And so I want to be here. I want to be at the student center. I want to be with everyone at one time. I want to be with my daughter in California. I want to be with the other one that's in Huntsville. And I want to spend time with my wife, and I want to spend time talking with people and being and helping and doing. And you can't do it all. But the biggest thing for me is when I'm moving forward to have something stop me. Like a red light driving down the road, and I'm already in a little bit of a hurry. Not because I have to be in a hurry, but because I'm just pressured, and I don't like to wait. I was reading something as I was thinking about all this, about a new invention that came out some time ago on getting mail service to move faster. Now, this was in 1860, and it was called the Pony Express. Let me share with you a few things, some interesting facts, and also some things that I think that relate to us. This was the fast mail service that came out. It was to deliver messages, newspaper mail from St. Joseph, Missouri, across the Great Plains, over the Rocky Mountains, and to the Sierra Nevadas in Sacramento, California, by horseback, using a series of relay stations during 18 months of its operation. It reduced the time for the messages to travel between the Atlantic and Pacific down to only 10 days. Back then, that was fast compared to the stagecoach. Now, here's an interesting thing. I wish Alex was here tonight, because the three founders of this, one was named William Russell, another one Alexander Majors, and the third one was named William Waddell. And I thought, too bad, Alex, you're not here tonight. They're the founders of the Pony Express. They were already in freighting business in the 1850s and had over 4,000 men, 3,500 wagons, and 40,000 oxen. But they were interested in condensing down time. Prominent businessmen working together, and they founded some things, and they decided they would do this. The founders of the Pony Express had hoped, this is another little irony here, to have won an exclusive government mail contract, but that didn't come about. I guess they aren't interested in time, are they? Okay? They involved 120 riders, stretched out over a period of 184 stations, 400 horses, and several hundred personnel involved in this. Basically, they were stationed about 10 miles apart. They figured that was the distance that a horse could gallop at full pace without really tiring, and then they'd swap horses. Interesting thing for those that study Spanish is the pack that they carried was called a mochila. from the Spanish background, which still used today, is called the backpack. 20 pounds in weight. Another thing that they were required to do was they were required to make an oath before they ever got involved in working this. The riders were, and they had to carry a Bible with them in their mochila. Their oath considered in this: I blank, do by hereby swear that before the great and living God, that during my engagement and while I'm an employee of Russell, Majors, and Waddell, I will under no circumstances use profane language, that I will drink no intoxicating liquors, that I will not quarrel or fight with any other employees or the firm, and that in every respect I will conduct myself honestly, to be faithful to my duties, and so direct my act as to win the confidence of my employers, and so help me God. And that was their oath. Interesting. They were replaced by the telegraph. Okay. Today we're using texting, right? Which takes milliseconds. Don't be doing that right now, okay? Trevor looks up. I didn't do that. Okay. It takes milliseconds to transmit. And I'm sitting there thinking this afternoon as I was going over this, and eventually we're going to come back down to Morse code, dots and dashes. We're about at it right now. The emphasis, however, is speed. We have always been a nation that's interested in getting things done faster. It's ingrained in us. I don't know that that came over necessarily from Europe. But I got to wondering about all of this when I read verse 4 from chapter 1. As Jesus is talking with his apostles, and they are anxious to see what's going on. Jesus has been raised from the dead. His power and God's power through him has been demonstrated. There is absolutely nothing that can stop them now. When you think about it, Jesus performed a tremendous amount of miracles. Healing people, raising people from the dead, walking on water, stilling storms. There was nothing that Jesus couldn't do. When they killed him, the apostles were devastated. And then he was raised. And when he was raised, the things like, okay, not even death can stop him. And they were fired up with all this. And you can just imagine. And Jesus, if you remember reading this morning here, spent 40 days in different times and places demonstrating the resurrection before he ascended up into heaven. So they're excited about this, and as they're watching him go up into heaven and all that's happening, they're remembering something that Jesus said back in verse 4, just before this happened. He said, assembling them together, verse 4 it says, he commanded them not to depart from Jerusalem, but to wait for the promise of the Father, which he said you've heard from me. And he goes on and talks about what the Father will do. Now they wanted to know when that kingdom was coming. And they're told, wait. These guys that have walked with Jesus for 3.5 years, and they've been chomping at the bits, as he's expressed. They're just ready to take off like a horse in a horse race. And then Jesus, just before he goes up, and they're discussing all this stuff, and he says, wait. And it's like, wait for what? And I began to think about that. Now, as we look at the whole thing and how it transpired, if I've done my calculations correct, and Chuck, you can correct me afterwards, don't do it in front of everybody right now, if I miss something here, but if Jesus instituted the Lord's Supper just before his death, at the Passover time, and the day of Pentecost in Acts chapter 2 is 50 days after that Passover. And Jesus was showing himself to be with the people for 40 days. You've got about a 10-day period of time, maybe a little less than that, because he was crucified maybe before the Passover was complete. No, but somewhere around 9-10 days that they were told to wait. Or they're actually told to wait. They don't know how long it is. But here they are in this upper room waiting. Dead time. Now, had it been this day and time, they'd be pulling out their cell phones and checking Facebook and doing different things and texting. We're still waiting and we're praying and we're doing it. And this whole thing, and I'm sitting here thinking, God's doing this on purpose. He has not ever been an anxious God. Not about time. Now, about saving people, yes. Were there people that needed to hear the gospel before that 10-day period? Yes. Were they ready to go? Maybe. Could God have done it sooner? Yes. He could have done it without the apostles. And so many things, and yet, as I'm thinking back through so much of what I read in Scripture, a lot of times God people is having to wait until God is ready. As is remarked within the New Testament, the day with God is like 1,000 years. And 1,000 years is just like a day. Time is not like time is to us. So I had to think. Passages talked about in the fullness of time Jesus came. Scripture actually is saying when it was exactly the right time. Like God had this calendar worked out. When He started time, He was watching, and here it is, this day and time. This is going to happen. And now at this day and time is when God plans to do this. And then from that thought about that word wait, and I've got it underlined because it's something that I need. I wait because, number one, God has a plan. And sometimes I need to just pause and think, God's involved in what I'm trying to do also. And you. Each one of you. In your plans. God has always had plans, and He's never really been in a hurry. I think back to those Israelites that at one point in time were ready to cross over into the promised land until they saw all the huge men that were there and the tall people and the tall cities, and they decided they couldn't do it. And God said, okay, you're not going to get to go. Well, they wanted to go, but that didn't work out. Then it was too late, and they had to wait. Not 40 days, which would have been equivalent to the number of days they'd spied out the land and came back with a report, but rather 40 years. And they had to wait because God had a scale and a schedule and something to accomplish with them. God has a plan. We don't like to wait. We invent things to keep us from having to wait. Like all these modern phones and so much more in computers and the technology. And there's no telling what there's going to be even 5 years down the road before you all can even hardly be in your careers. What will be transpiring. And every bit of it will either be to modernize and make our life a little more convenient or to speed up what we're already going at mega speed at. Waiting. I pull up a document on my computer and I hit download, and if I see a little circle going around like this, I go, come on, give me a break. 2 seconds have passed. That's like you? Or for those that use the microwave and you're reheating your coffee and you stick the thing in and you press a minute and a half or however long you do your coffee. And you go, okay, and what can I do? I've got a minute and a half. Well, there's a lot of things we can do. But we kill ourselves stressing over waiting. And I have to think, what did those apostles do in that room? They prayed. And they had no idea how long it was going to be. But they took advantage of making sure that they were in communication with the God that had the plan. And that was what they needed the time for, you see. Too often I spend my time trying to do the things that I do. You see the I and me and my, instead of considering all those little moments with God. But they didn't have that problem. And they had, no, not the technology we had then, But they stayed put because it was good for them to wait and realize that God has a plan. And when it's ready to be fulfilled, it will be, and it will be better than the plans that we might have. Number two, as we're thinking about God having a plan, obviously the next point would be God is working. He didn't stop when Jesus was raised from the dead. And he didn't stop when Jesus went up into heaven. He didn't stop after the apostles began preaching on the day of Pentecost that we talked about this morning. Nor did he stop after they quit performing all the miracles and all the New Testament was written as was needed to be done and verified and proven that the miracles demonstrated these speakers actually are speaking for God. And when it gets all packaged together, God still has not stopped. He continues to work. But his schedule is so different than David's schedule. And he will get out of me a whole lot more when I realize God's still working. God's still working. He didn't quit when the Bible concluded. And they sewed it together and put it in a little binding and actually started printing it on Gutenberg's printing press back in the, 1600s or so. He still does. It's amazing if we stop and think about it, what God is capable of doing if we'll just wait on him. There's a passage that I oftentimes refer back to, Psalm 46. I use it occasionally just for my own comfort when I'm stressed. Not necessarily when I'm stressed over the issue of time, but just trying to get things done and feeling like I'm not getting there. I've quoted verse 1 quite often to people when I'm in the hospital with them. I quote it oftentimes as a footnote at the bottom of either an email or an actual note that I handwrite out. That God is our refuge and our strength. And although we don't like to work on slow scales, this part says he's an ever-present help in our time of trial. It doesn't say he's going to fix it all that quickly, but he's there always, or a present help, some translations say. And then as you read on, it says, therefore I will not fear. You see, when I've got God working, everything's going to work out. So if I can remember that God is involved in this plan, then I'm not going to stress. Therefore, I will not fear, even though the earth be removed. And that's, you've heard of having the rug pulled out from underneath you. But there are times that we have earthquakes and tremors, and the earth is moved. And even though the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea, and I thought about that passage back a couple of years ago when that huge, huge wave slammed against Petaputi, India, and just wiped out all kinds of people that we know and care for there. Though its waters roar and be troubled, though the mountains shake with its swelling, there's a river whose streams shall make glad the city of God, the holy place of the tabernacle of the Most High. God is in the midst of her, and she shall not be moved. We move on down, verse 7, it says, the Lord of hosts is with us, the God of Jacob is our refuge. Come behold the works of the Lord, not my works, how much I can do, but the works of the Lord, who has made desolations to the earth. He makes the war cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and he cuts the spear in two and he burns the chariot in the fire. And then verse 10. Be still and know that I am God. It's hard for me to think about God operating when I'm so busy doing things. And I'm not one to sit still too well. I've always been told when I was little I had ants in my pants. Probably. But it's good for us to sit still and just stop and think about what God's up to. What he's been up to in our lives. What he's been up to at Central. What he's been up to for hundreds and hundreds of years. And past the time where we exist What is God doing with the one small examples that we might have here and there along the way, which will make an impact? Be still and know that I'm God. It's good for us just to stop and wait for some things sometime and realize, number one, that God has a plan. Number two, that He's still working. And then just watch. For all of us who don't have ants in your pants, who don't have those anxious moments, I guess I got to thinking about, don't wait too long. You know, I thought about the apostles and what actually went on in their organizing and what they did, you know, and then we read about chapter 2 this morning and how the Holy Spirit came in and they were so, the sound of the mighty rushing wind and the languages and all of that happening. And they didn't stop and look at each other and say, wow, this is really neat. We ought to form a committee and examine and see what we ought to be doing here. No, they got to work then. So we got to have an understanding that there are times that we will be waiting on God, and there are times, too, that we need to step forward and God opens the door and says, well, here it is, as He did with them on the day of Pentecost. And grab hold of those moments, because when God is working, it's time to move. Kind of like the Old Testament situation when the Israelites were there and they were camped here and there out in the wilderness, you know, roaming around for that 40 years. When the cloud lifted up or the fire lifted up, it was like, okay, God's moving, let's go. Pack up, let's get moving. So we march with God's schedule. Now that's a hard one to work out. But I think along in life, when we're waiting for the right things and we're spending time in prayer, that God will help us to see some of those things a little clearer if we'll just wait and let it happen. But God has a plan with us. He's still working. Take time in prayer and understand that waiting isn't half bad sometimes. It means God is working on things. And He does that in the hearts of individuals, in the lives of people that you don't know but may know next week, and so much more. Worked out well in the day of Pentecost, and I think it will for us, if we trust the God that does all this. That's all I have for the lesson tonight. But if you're like us, right, as we close this out, and don't wait on that one. Scriptures are real clear about that. Now is the day of salvation. Don't wait on that. Don't let Satan hold you off and keep you from making a commitment if you've not made one, or if you need to recommit because you've not done right. We sing a song to encourage you. Come down front while we stand and sing.